In the early 1900s, working conditions and wages in American garment factories were horrible for men, women, and children, with dangerous machinery, few workers' rights, weak laws, and lax enforcement. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire on March 25, 1911, is one of the worst in American history, with 146 people killed in less than 20 minutes. Some of the workers burned to death, others leaped to their deaths from 100 feet up. On the 100th anniversary, the U.S. Department of Labor noted the terrible loss of life eventually helped change working conditions, improve safety, increase workers' rights and wages. I selected this case study because one of my grandmothers actually worked as a seamstress in New York City in the garment factories in the early 1900s. And also I thought it was an interesting case study on how our working conditions and our response capabilities have evolved over time. So what the heck is a shirtwaist anyway? According to Amy Kohler, whose grandmother survived the Triangle fire, shirtwaists defined an era in workplace fashion with a high neckline, bouffant sleeves, and a trim waist, worn with a tailored skirt, and it was an inexpensive alternative to a dress and less restrictive and decorative than Victorian fashion, according to Kohler. So the owners of the Triangle factory were known as the Shirtwaist Kings, and they were influential leaders in the garment industry. They exerted their power in 1909 when Triangle refused to accept demands for better pay, fewer hours, and unionization. In the general strike, more than 15,000 garment workers were successful in forcing concessions from smaller factories who accepted the terms in order to get their business back online. But the Triangle factory would not recognize the unions and kept their outdated and ineffective safety measures. Some of these actually relied on buckets of water to douse fires instead of sprinkler systems, which were optional in the building codes of the time. So in the case study, Valsic and Tracy apply current procedures to the oversight, the conduct, and the enforcement of building codes and inspections. But in 1911, many building codes, including the use of sprinkler systems, were optional. And they were also sidestepped. Inspectors had little authority to enforce codes, and politicians gave little attention to the well-being of workers. And police officers were often complicit in breaking strikes and intimidating workers. According to Kalin in 2002, it's documented that there were at least 240 sewing machines crammed into the 8th floor and the 9th floor of the shirtwaist factory. They were lined up in 75-foot-long rows, and actually they blocked the escape routes. Exit doors opened inward, and some exits were blocked to deter worker theft. Workers passed through a narrow entry where they and their belongings were searched for scraps of fabric they might be stealing. And then also building codes call for 3 stairways when the Ash building was built in 1900, but the architects only wanted to build 2, so they identified a wrought iron fire escape as an acceptable 3rd exit. But really what happened at the Triangle factory, it could have happened anywhere. Colin and then Valsic and Tracy described previous safety and fire code violations at the Triangle factory, which were common during that era. In 1902, there were 2 fires at the Triangle, and again in 1909, a spark from a motor ignited remnants under a work table on the 9th floor. No fire drills were conducted, and workers routinely doused small fires that sprang up. They put them out themselves with buckets of water. So Valsic, Tracy, the Department of Labor, and Colin all describe how about 500 workers were on the Triangle factory floors late on Saturday, March 25, 1911. Fire breaks out as workers are on the 8th and 9th and 10th floors. They're getting ready to leave for the day. A number of workers escaped by the 2 small staircases. A small number use elevators whose cables literally snap. The fire escape collapses, and executives on the 10th floor escape across the roof to a nearby building. A fire company arrives in minutes and begins pumping high-pressure water. They also deploy their ladders, which only reach the 6th floor. Numerous people try to jump and land on the extended ladders, but none are successful. Dozens of workers balance on the ledges outside the windows on the 8th and 9th floors. The fire companies deploy their nets and people bring blankets. Some people fall from the ledges, others are pushed, and more jump. But the height makes this impossible, and many people die when the nets and the blankets rip. A second fire company responds, along with more police officers, firefighters, and they rush in to help evacuate the workers. And actually, the fire is really very quickly contained. It's out within about 30 minutes. No other buildings were endangered, and in fact, the Triangle building survives and continues to be used. It's now called the Brown Building at New York University. So responders begin to pull people from the building in the elevator shaft, and survivors stumble and are taken to several local hospitals. St. Vincent's and Bellevue were among the many hospitals that cared for the fire victims. And St. Vincent's would actually care for survivors from the Titanic and the World Trade Center attacks in 1993 and 2001, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. The hospital morgues are quickly filled to capacity, and bodies are moved to the East River Pier. Police and orderlies hold kerosene lanterns as families search the burned and disfigured bodies for a familiar piece of jewelry, a distinctive part of the dental work, personal garments to help identify their loved ones. The last 6 bodies were finally identified in 2011, according to the Kiel Center at Cornell University. So our modern procedures and methods to ensure positive identification and next of kin notification are much more complex. Family unification programs, disaster mortuary teams are rostered by non-government organizations, states, and the federal government to provide mutual aid to medical examiners and coroners. And similar mutual aid systems are maintained for search and rescue, law enforcement, fire, EMS, medical, and mental health workers. The U.S. Department of Labor in 2015 notes that the Triangle factory owners were acquitted at trial of manslaughter, but the nation was horrified at the deaths. And New York was disgusted enough with the working conditions, wages, and regulations to lead the nation in adopting some of the country's strongest worker protection laws. These eventually became model legislation for the rest of the country. 3 years after the fire, the families of 23 of the victims were compensated $75 each by the owners of the Ash Building for each life lost. Equally as complex as our modern methods to positively identify disaster victims is our ability to and our methods to investigate industrial accidents and fires, to determine causes of death, and to hold accountable the responsible parties. I think one of the failings of the case study is that it overlaid all of these modern practices and expectations onto the old and antiquated expectations of 1911. And while I understand how those apply in this day and age, I think that maybe the case study would have been a little stronger if it had concentrated on the practices and the expectations of 1911. Here are a few of the resources that references that I used for this case study. I enjoyed learning more about this horrible accident, which I think really could have been completely prevented, or at least made much less worse with just a few simple safety and fire prevention methods. So I hope you enjoyed it as well, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.